10-year-old girl suddenly got pregnant. On the day of delivery, doctors discovered something. The sound of cartoons drifted up the stairs as Emily loaded the washing machine, smiling at the familiar theme song that meant Saturday morning was in full swing. She could picture Ella sprawled on the living room floor, probably drawing while she watched TV, her dark curls falling over her face in that way that drove Emily crazy, but Ella insisted was her style. Before we can continue, if you love your family, subscribe to this channel to help up creating amazing stories. Now, let's continue. Hey, monkey. Michael's voice boomed from downstairs, followed by Ella's squeal of delight. Emily shook her head, knowing exactly what was coming next, the weekend tickle attack that had become their tradition since Ella could walk. Sure enough, the squealing got louder, mixed with breathless giggles and Michael's exaggerated monster noises. Daddy, stop. Mom, help. Ella's laughter echoed through the house, the kind of pure joy that made their home feel alive. Emily finished throwing in the last sock and headed downstairs, finding exactly what she expected. Michael had Ella pinned on the couch, tickling her sides while she squirmed and laughed. All right, you two, Emily said, trying to sound stern but failing miserably. Who's hungry? Me, they both shouted in unison, another one of their silly habits that made Emily roll her eyes but secretly love every second of it. The kitchen quickly became their gathering spot, with Ella perched on her favorite stool at the counter, swinging her legs while she told them about the latest drama in 5th grade. Something about who sat with who at lunch, and how Jenny brought cupcakes for everyone except Todd because he pulled her hair last week. That's not very nice of Jenny, Emily commented, cracking eggs into a bowl for their traditional weekend pancakes. What do you think about that? Well, Ella said, drawing out the word like she was about to deliver a Supreme Court verdict. Todd shouldn't have pulled her hair, but maybe if Jenny shared a cupcake with him, he'd be nicer next time. Michael caught Emily's eye across the kitchen, both of them sharing that proud parent moment. Their daughter had such a good heart, always trying to see the best in people. It was one of the countless things that made their family life feel so special. Weekends like these were their favorite. No rush, no schedule, just time together doing whatever felt right. Sometimes they'd end up at the park, Ella showing off her super amazing cartwheel skills while Michael spotted her, both of them pretending she wasn't just throwing herself sideways. Other times they'd build blanket forts in the living room, complete with secret passwords and strict no parents allowed rules that somehow always got bent when Emily brought in hot chocolate. Even their weekday routines had a special kind of magic to them. Michael never just helped with homework. He turned it into a game show, complete with ridiculous voices and made-up sound effects that had Ella giggling through her multiplication tables. Emily knew other parents might think they were a bit much, but she couldn't help making every dinner a little celebration, even if it was just putting a tiny paper umbrella in Ella's milk glass or cutting her sandwiches into shapes. Mom, can we have chocolate chips in the pancakes? Ella asked, already reaching for the bag she knew was kept in the second cabinet. Only if you promise to eat some actual breakfast food too, Emily bargained, knowing full well she'd given regardless. Maybe some fruit? Deal. Ella bounced on her stool, nearly toppling it before Michael steadied her with a practiced hand. Can we go to the park after? Jenny told me there's a new family of ducks in the pond, and I really want to see the babies. I think we can manage that, Michael said, winking at Emily. He didn't mention the surprise he'd packed in the garage, a new kite he'd bought last week, just waiting for the perfect windy day like today. Their days flowed together like this, each one different, but somehow familiar in the best way. At school, Ella's teachers always commented on how she lit up the classroom, ready to help anyone who needed it. She was the kid who noticed when someone was sitting alone at lunch and would drag her whole friend group over to join them. It wasn't always perfect. She had her moments of sass and stubbornness, which Michael swore she got from Emily, while Emily blamed him. But even those moments somehow felt right, just part of who they were as a family. The neighborhood kids knew their house as the fun one, where Michael might suddenly break out the sprinkler on a hot day or Emily would appear with popsicles just when they needed them most. Their front yard often looked like a kid magnet had exploded, with bikes scattered across the lawn and jump ropes tangled in the flower beds, but neither parent minded. The mess meant life was happening. Memories were being made. Remember when we were worried about being good parents? Emily asked Michael one evening, watching Ella teach her stuffed animals about the solar system, complete with sound effects for each planet. She'd been obsessed with space ever since their trip to the Science Museum last month. God, yeah, Michael chuckled, pulling Emily closer on the couch. Remember those parenting books you made us read? Hey, they weren't completely useless, Emily defended, but she was laughing too. All those worries seemed silly now, watching their daughter flourish in ways no book could have predicted. The truth was, they'd figured it out as they went along, just like everyone else. They'd learned that sometimes the best parenting moments happened when plans fell apart, like the time it rained on their carefully planned beach day, and they ended up having an indoor beach party instead, complete with umbrella drinks, fruit punch for Ella, and sand castles built from rice and baking trays. Their house wasn't the biggest or the fanciest on the block, but it was full of evidence of their life together. Ella's art covered the fridge, ranging from kindergarten stick figures to her more recent attempts at manga-style drawings. The living room walls tracked her growth in pencil marks, each one dated and accompanied by a memory. First day of school, lost first tooth, learned to ride bike. Dinner times were sacred in their house, not because of any strict rules, but because they all genuinely wanted to be there. Ella would ramble about her day, jumping from topic to topic while Emily and Michael tried to keep up. They had this game where they'd each share the best and worst part of their day, though Ella often struggled with the worst part in her world. Even the bad stuff usually had a silver lining. The worst part was when I fell during recess, she'd say, but the best part was right after because Tommy helped me up and then everyone wanted to play hospital, and I got to be the doctor. These moments, strung together day after day, created the tapestry of their family life. It wasn't perfect. There were arguments about bedtime, negotiations over vegetables, and the occasional meltdown over lost toys or forgotten homework. But even these moments felt right somehow, just part of the whole picture that made them who they were. Michael still remembered the day Ella was born, how tiny and fragile she'd seemed. Now here she was, this force of nature who could talk for hours about her latest interests, who made friends wherever she went, who still crawled into their bed during thunderstorms, but insisted she wasn't scared. She just wanted to keep them company. Life moved in its own rhythm in their house, marked by small traditions they'd created without really trying. Sunday morning pancakes. Tuesday game nights. The way Michael always kissed both their foreheads before leaving for work. How Emily tucked little notes into Ella's lunchbox, even though Ella pretended to be embarrassed by them now. It was the kind of life that made them grateful every day, even when things weren't perfect. It started on a Tuesday, just another ordinary morning of rushing to get ready for school. Ella sat at the breakfast table, pushing her cereal around the bowl instead of eating it. Emily was busy packing lunches, only half listening to Michael's rundown of his upcoming meetings, when she noticed the unusual quiet from Ella's corner. "Not hungry, sweetie?" Emily paused, watching her daughter's face more carefully. "My tummy feels weird," Ella mumbled, but when Emily pressed for details, she just shrugged it off. "It's okay now. Can I have a different cereal?" Emily swapped out the bowl for Ella's favorite sugary brand, breaking their usual sweet cereals are for weekends rule. The morning rushed on, and soon enough, Ella was bouncing out the door to catch the bus, seemingly back to her usual self. But the complaint came again the next day and the next, sometimes at breakfast, sometimes during dinner, or randomly while watching TV. Each time, the discomfort seemed to pass quickly enough that Emily found it easy to dismiss. Kids got stomach aches all the time, right? Between cafeteria food, playground excitement, and the constant swapping of snacks with friends, an upset stomach hardly seemed unusual. "Maybe we should cut back on dairy," Emily suggested to Michael one evening, after Ella had picked at her dinner before asking to be excused early. "Or it could be anxiety about that big math test coming up." Michael nodded, distracted by a work email on his phone. "She seemed fine at the park yesterday. Probably just a phase." The weeks slipped by, and life continued its normal rhythm. Ella still had her good days, plenty of them, where she was her usual energetic self, racing around the playground with her friends and chattering nonstop about everything and nothing. But the pattern of complaints became more frequent, weaving itself into their daily life so gradually that Emily barely noticed how normal it had become to keep antacids in her purse and pack bland snacks, just in case. It was during bath time when Emily first noticed something different. Ella stood in her swimsuit, ready to shower after her weekly swim class, when Emily caught sight of her profile. There was something odd about the way her stomach curved, just slightly, but enough to catch Emily's attention. "Honey, does your tummy hurt right now?" Emily asked, trying to keep her voice casual while her heart picked up speed. Ella glanced down at herself, pressing a hand against her middle. "Kind of, but not bad. Can I have bubbles in my bath?" Emily added extra bubbles, watching as Ella played with her bath toys, seemingly unbothered. But that night, after Ella was asleep, Emily found herself on her laptop, falling down a rabbit hole of medical websites. Each search led to another, more worrying possibility, until Michael finally closed her laptop. "You'll drive yourself crazy doing that," he said, but Emily could see the concern in his eyes too. "If you're really worried, we'll take her to Dr. Peterson." But making an appointment wasn't as simple as it should have been. Ella insisted she felt fine now, that it wasn't a big deal. There were school projects to finish, birthday parties to attend, normal life that kept rolling forward. Emily found herself watching Ella constantly, analyzing every grimace or quiet moment, second-guessing every time Ella passed on a favorite food or asked to rest during their usual weekend adventures. The breaking point came during their monthly movie night. Ella was curled up between them on the couch, a bowl of barely touched popcorn in her lap, when she suddenly doubled over. This wasn't like the usual vague complaints. The pain was real enough to bring tears to her eyes. "It really hurts," she whimpered, and the fear in her voice sent ice through Emily's veins. Michael was already reaching for his keys, movie forgotten. The drive to urgent care was tense, with Michael taking corners faster than usual while Emily sat in the back with Ella, holding her hand and trying to keep her own panic from showing. Ella had stopped crying but lay curled against Emily's side, unusually quiet. In the harsh fluorescent lights of the waiting room, Emily could see what she'd been trying not to notice for weeks. Ella's face was paler than usual, with subtle shadows under her eyes that spoke of poor sleep. Her stomach definitely showed an unusual bulge, more noticeable now that Emily allowed herself to really look. "How long has she been having pain?" the nurse asked, and Emily felt shame wash over her as she tried to piece together a timeline. How long had she been dismissing the signs? "A few weeks," she admitted, then corrected herself. "Maybe longer. It would come and go. We thought it was just stomach bugs or something she ate." Her voice trailed off as she caught the nurse's expression, not quite judgment, but something that made Emily's stomach clench. Michael squeezed her hand, and she knew he was feeling the same guilt. More questions followed, each one making Emily feel worse. Had there been changes in appetite? Yes, now that they thought about it. Changes in energy level? Maybe, but Ella still had plenty of good days. Any other symptoms they'd noticed? "The bulge," Emily finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I noticed it recently, but I don't know what I thought." They were moved to an exam room, its walls covered in cheerful cartoon characters that seemed to mock their worry. Ella sat on the exam table, swinging her legs and looking more interested in the medical posters than concerned about her situation. The paper crinkled beneath her as she shifted position, the sound unnaturally loud in the quiet room. "Does it still hurt, Monkey?" Michael asked, using a special nickname for her, the one that usually made her giggle. This time she just nodded, pressing a hand against her middle. Emily paced the small room, counting tiles on the floor, reading every poster twice, anything to keep her mind from racing ahead to worst-case scenarios. Michael remained in his chair, outwardly calm, but betrayed by the way he kept checking his phone, though they both knew no one was going to call. When the doctor finally came in, his friendly smile did little to ease the tension that had built up during their wait. He asked many of the same questions they'd already answered, but this time followed them with a physical exam that made Emily's heart race faster with each careful press of his hands against Ella's abdomen. "I'd like to run some tests," he said finally, his voice carefully neutral in a way that made Emily's chest tight. "Just to rule things out." The words "rule things out" hung in the air like a threat. Emily wanted to grab Ella and run, to go back to their comfortable life where stomach aches were just stomach aches and every pain didn't feel like a warning sign they'd ignored for too long. But instead, she found herself nodding, signing forms, watching as they led Ella away for tests, leaving her and Michael alone with their fears and regrets. The waiting room clock ticked forward with painful slowness. Emily had already counted every ceiling tile, read every outdated magazine, and memorized the pattern of the industrial carpet beneath her feet. Michael paced, his shoes making soft scuffing sounds against the floor, occasionally pausing to look down the hallway where they'd taken Ella. A child's laugh echoed from somewhere in the hospital, making Emily's heart twist. Their own daughter was somewhere in this maze of corridors, probably scared and confused, while they sat here helpless. The guilt ate at her. They should have noticed sooner, should have acted faster, should have done something different. Family of Ella Matthews? They both jumped at the nurse's voice. She led them not back to Ella, but to a small consultation room that made Emily's stomach drop. These rooms were where bad news happened. She'd watched enough medical shows to know that. The doctor who'd examined Ella earlier joined them, along with another doctor who introduced herself as Dr. Sarah Chin, a specialist. "Please sit down," Dr. Chin said, her gentle tone only increasing Emily's anxiety. Michael's hand found Emily's, squeezing so hard it almost hurt. "Where's Ella?" Emily managed to ask. "She's comfortable, watching cartoons with one of our nurses," Dr. Chin assured them. "We needed to speak with you privately first." The pause that followed seemed endless. Emily could hear her own heartbeat, too fast and too loud in her ears. Michael's breathing beside her had turned shallow and quick. "The tests we've run have revealed something unexpected," Dr. Chin began, her words careful and measured. "I need you to understand that we've been very thorough, and we've confirmed our findings multiple times." "Just tell us," Michael interrupted, his voice rough. "Please." Dr. Chin met their eyes, her expression grave. "Your daughter is pregnant." The words hung in the air, impossible and wrong, like a mistake in the universe itself. Emily heard a strange sound and realized it was coming from her own throat, something between a laugh and a sob. "That's ridiculous," Michael said flatly. "She's 10 years old. Run the tests again." "We have," the first doctor interjected. "Multiple times. The blood work and ultrasound both confirm it." Emily's mind refused to process the words, like they were being spoken in a language she didn't understand. Pregnant. Ella. Their little girl who still slept with a stuffed unicorn, who needed help reaching the top kitchen shelves, who just last week had asked if the Tooth Fairy and Santa Claus were friends. "This is impossible," she whispered, but even as she said it, her mind was putting pieces together. The stomach aches, the subtle changes in Ella's body, the fatigue. She felt sick. Michael's hand had gone slack in hers. When she looked at him, his face had drained of color, his jaw clenched so tight she could see the muscles working. In all their years together, she'd never seen him look like this, like he might shatter or explode at any moment. "We understand this is shocking," Dr. Chin continued, her voice steady and professional. "We have a team of specialists who will help guide you through this situation. There are protocols we need to follow and decisions that will need to be made, but right now, the most important thing is to remain calm for Ella's sake." "Calm?" Michael's voice cracked on the word. "Our daughter, our 10-year-old daughter. You're telling us she's..." He couldn't finish the sentence, pushing back from the table so violently his chair scraped against the floor. Emily felt suspended between her husband's rage and her own mounting horror. Questions exploded in her mind, each worse than the last. How? When? Who? The implications made her stomach heave, and she had to swallow hard against the nausea. "Does she know?" Emily asked, surprised she could form words at all. Dr. Chin shook her head. "We haven't discussed the diagnosis with her yet. We felt it was important to speak with you first. However, we do have a child psychologist on call who specializes in these situations." These situations. As if this was something that happened often enough to have a protocol. As if anything about this could be normal or manageable or okay. "We need to see her," Michael said suddenly, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Now." The walk to Ella's room felt like a dream, the kind where your feet move through molasses and the hallway stretches endlessly ahead. Emily tried to get her face under control, knowing they couldn't let Ella see their distress, but her cheeks felt stiff, and her eyes burned. Ella was sitting up in bed, happily watching SpongeBob on the room's small TV. She looked so normal, so innocent, that for a moment Emily could almost believe there had been a mistake. But then Ella shifted, and even under the hospital gown, Emily could see it, the slight swell of her stomach that now held such horrible significance.
Mom, Dad.
Ella's face lit up when she saw them. Can we go home now? The nurse said I had to wait for the doctor, but I feel better. Emily heard Michael make a choked sound behind her. She forced herself forward, sitting on the edge of Ella's bed and taking her small hand. How could those hands, still with cotton candy pink nail polish from their spa day last weekend, belong to someone who was... She couldn't even think the word. Not just yet, sweetheart, Emily managed, her voice almost normal. The doctors need to talk to us a bit more. But I'm hungry, Ella complained, and the normality of the wine made Emily's heart crack a little more. Can we get McDonald's on the way home? Emily looked helplessly at Dr. Chin, who stepped forward with that same gentle professionalism. Ella, we need to have a little talk first. Your mom and dad will stay right here with you. Would that be okay? Ella's face scrunched up in confusion, picking up on the tension in the room despite everyone's efforts to hide it. Am I sick? Is that why my stomach keeps hurting? Emily felt Michael's hand on her shoulder, squeezing almost too hard, as Dr. Chin pulled up a chair beside the bed. Outside, the hospital continued its endless rhythm of beeping machines and squeaking shoes on linoleum, while inside this room, their whole world was about to change forever. The drive home from the hospital felt like moving through thick fog. Emily sat in the back with Ella, who had fallen asleep against her shoulder, exhausted from crying and confusion. The conversation with Dr. Chen had been gentle but clear, though Ella hadn't really understood most of it.
How could she?
Even they were struggling to process it. Michael's knuckles were white on the steering wheel, his eyes fixed on the road with almost painful intensity. Every few minutes, he'd glance in the rearview mirror, checking on them, his face a mask of contained emotion. Their house looked exactly the same as they'd left it, dishes still in the sink from their interrupted dinner, Ella's homework spread across the coffee table, the TV remote where she dropped it when the pain got bad. But everything felt different now, like they'd stepped into a twisted version of their life where nothing made sense anymore. I'll take her up to bed, Emily whispered, careful not to wake Ella. Michael nodded, still not trusting himself to speak. After tucking Ella in, Emily stood in the doorway, watching her daughter sleep. In the soft glow of her unicorn nightlight, she looked so small, so innocent. The worn stuffed rabbit she'd had since she was 2 was clutched against her chest, her face peaceful in sleep. Emily felt the tears she'd been holding back finally spill over. Downstairs, Michael had pulled out a legal pad and was writing furiously. Lists of names, places, dates, anyone who had been near Ella in the past few months. The school secretary had already emailed over Ella's attendance records and class schedules after Michael's tense phone call explaining they needed it for medical reasons. We need to make a timeline, he said when Emily joined him, his voice rough. Figure out when it could have happened, who had access to her. Emily sank into the couch, picking up Ella's math worksheet from the coffee table. Simple multiplication problems half finished. How could their daughter be old enough for this to happen, but young enough to still be learning times tables? The hospital already called the police. Emily reminded him quietly. They'll investigate. I'm not waiting for them. Michael's pen pressed so hard it tore through the paper. This happened under our roof in our neighborhood. Someone, his voice cracked. Someone hurt our baby, and I want to know who. They spent hours going through their phones, looking at photos and videos from the past few months, searching for clues they might have missed. Every male adult who had been near Ella became suspect. Teachers, coaches, the father of her best friend Jenny, even the grandfather who visited last summer. What about the swim instructor? Emily suggested, her stomach churning as she added another name to their growing list. Or the janitor at school. He's always in the halls during class changes. Add them, Michael said grimly. Anyone who could have had a moment alone with her. The next few days passed in a blur of police interviews and medical appointments. They pulled Ella out of school, citing a family emergency, unable to face the questions that would come once people noticed her condition. The police spoke to her gently, in a room with soft chairs and colorful walls, but Ella's answers were frustratingly vague and innocent. "No one hurt me," she kept insisting, confused by all the questions. Why does everyone keep asking that? Emily and Michael sat through their own interviews, answering endless questions about their routines, their neighbors, their family friends. Yes, they usually knew where Ella was. No, they didn't let her go places alone. Yes, they monitored her internet use. No, they hadn't noticed any changes in her behavior, besides the stomach aches. The neighborhood seemed different now, threatening instead of familiar. Emily found herself studying every man they passed, wondering if he was the one. She watched how they looked at Ella, searching for any sign of recognition or guilt. Michael took to driving Ella to her doctor's appointments through different routes each time, paranoid about being followed. Their phones buzzed constantly with messages from concerned friends who'd noticed their sudden absence from social activities. Emily couldn't bring herself to answer most of them. How could she explain why they'd stopped attending neighborhood barbecues, or why Ella wasn't at Jenny's birthday party? The police suggested they see a child psychologist who specialized in trauma cases. Dr. Martinez had a warm office filled with toys and art supplies, but Ella showed no interest in playing during their sessions. She just sat there, confused and increasingly frustrated by all the grown-ups asking her weird questions. Sometimes children block out traumatic experiences, Dr. Martinez explained during their parent consultation. Or they might not understand what happened to them was wrong, especially if the perpetrator was someone they trusted. The word perpetrator made Emily's blood run cold. Somewhere out there was a person who had done this to their daughter, someone who might be watching them right now, someone who might have done this to other children. Their suspicions touched everyone. When Jenny's dad waved from his driveway, Michael made a note of the time and date. When Ella's math teacher sent an email asking if she needed to make up missed assignments, Emily scrutinized every word for hidden meanings. The investigation spread through their lives like ink through water, staining everything it touched. They interviewed Ella's dance instructor, her piano teacher, the folder containing the results. But they didn't need to hear the words. Her careful expression said everything. "The DNA analysis confirms paternity," she said gently. "Ethan is the biological father." Michael's fist came down on the table hard enough to make everyone jump. Emily felt oddly calm, like she was floating somewhere above her body, watching this scene play out from a safe distance. From the next room, they could hear Sarah's wails. David's voice rose in protest, demanding something about false positives and contaminated samples. The walls seemed too thin for all this pain. The genetic counselor kept talking, explaining things about genetic markers and probability ratios, but none of it mattered. The truth they'd already known in their hearts was now confirmed in black and white, sealed with scientific certainty. Outside the consultation room, they could hear feet rushing past. Someone was crying. Doors were slamming. The whole building seemed to be absorbing the shockwaves of their shared tragedy. What happens now? Emily heard herself ask. The counselor launched into explanations about legal proceedings, therapy options, support services. She had pamphlets for everything, dealing with childhood trauma, understanding adolescent sexuality, coping with family crisis. The titles alone made Emily's stomach turn. When they got home, Ella was waiting with Emily's mother, eager to show them a picture she'd drawn during their absence. It showed two stick figures holding hands, labeled me and Ethan in her messy handwriting. Emily had to run to the bathroom to throw up. That night, after Ella was asleep, they sat in the kitchen with untouched cups of coffee, trying to plan their next steps. The lawyer they'd consulted had outlined their options, none of them good. Press charges against a 12-year-old boy. Try to handle it privately? Move away and start fresh somewhere else? He was just a kid himself, Emily whispered, voicing the thought that had been haunting her. How do we make sense of that? Michael's face hardened. He knew enough to tell her to keep it secret. He knew enough to hide what they were doing. But did he really understand? Emily pressed her hands against her eyes. God, Michael, they're both children. How did this happen? The sound of a car door slamming next door made them both tense. Through the kitchen window, they could see David and Sarah returning home, walking separately up their driveway, the distance between them visible even in the dark. Their phones had been buzzing all day. Word had spread about the test results. Friends, family, even local news reporters were trying to contact them. Everyone wanted details, wanted to understand how something like this could happen in their quiet suburban neighborhood. The reality was settling over them like a heavy blanket. There was no going back. Their daughter's childhood had been irreversibly altered, and so had Ethan's. Two families were shattered, and at the center of it all were two children who still couldn't fully grasp what they'd done or what it meant for their futures. Emily found herself thinking about the baby, a child created by two children. In a few months, it would be real, and they would all have to face decisions none of them were prepared to make. The word grandmother floated through her mind, and she had to grip the kitchen counter to stay upright. She was too young to be a grandmother, and Ella was far too young to be a mother. Michael reached across the table and took her hand, his grip almost painful. In the quiet of their kitchen, with their daughter sleeping upstairs and their world crumbling around them, they held onto each other and faced the truth they'd been dreading. This was only the beginning. The mediation room at the community center felt too small for the weight of what they were trying to accomplish. Emily sat beside Michael, a box of tissues within reach, while David and Sarah occupied chairs on the opposite side. Between them, Monica, the court-appointed mediator, maintained a calm presence despite the crackling tension. "We need to discuss practical arrangements," Monica began, her voice steady. "The baby will be here in less than 3 months, and we need a plan that protects both children while ensuring the baby's needs are met." The word baby made everyone flinch. They'd been dancing around it for weeks, using vague terms like the situation or when it happens. "Ella doesn't even understand she's having a baby," Emily said, her voice cracking. "She thinks she's just sick. How can we expect her to be a mother?" "She won't be," Michael cut in firmly. "She can't be. She's a child herself." Sarah nodded, speaking for the first time. "Ethan, he still asks when he can come home, when he can see Ella again. He doesn't understand why everyone's so angry." The silence that followed was heavy with shared pain. These meetings had started as hostile confrontations, with threats of lawsuits and criminal charges flying back and forth. But somewhere along the way, exhaustion had set in, along with the realization that they were all struggling with the same impossible situation. The counselors at the youth center say Ethan's making progress, David offered tentatively. He's starting to understand that what he did was wrong, even if he didn't mean to hurt anyone. Michael's jaw clenched, but he didn't explode like he would have a few weeks ago. The anger was still there, but it had been tempered by countless therapy sessions and the simple fact that rage wouldn't change what had happened. "We've been talking to adoption agencies," Sarah said quietly. If that's something you consider. For the baby." Emily felt tears sliding down her cheeks. They discussed this option with their own counselor, giving the baby to a family far away from all this trauma. But something about it felt wrong, like running away from their responsibilities. "What if we raised it?" The words came out before Emily could stop them. Everyone stared at her. Not as Ella's baby, but as ours. All of ours. The grandparents. The idea hung in the air like a lifeline. Monica leaned forward, her interest clearly piqued. That's actually not uncommon in situations like these. The children could continue their lives, get the help they need, while the baby would be raised by capable adults who understand the situation. "We could share custody," Sarah whispered, looking at David. Like grandparents normally would." "It would mean staying here," Michael pointed out. "Living next door to each other. Seeing each other every day." The thought seemed impossible at first. How could they live next to the family whose son had changed their lives forever? But then again, how could they take this baby away from the only people who would understand its unique story? "We'd need rules," David said.
Boundaries.
"Professional help for both kids." "And we'd need to be united," Emily added.
No blam, no finger pointing.
"We'd have to find a way to make peace with this." The conversation shifted into practical matters, legal arrangements, living situations, schooling for Ella and Ethan. They would need to create a new normal that protected both children while providing a stable environment for the baby. Monica guided them through the logistics, her experience with similar cases helping them navigate the complicated terrain. They would need family court approval, psychological evaluations, and a formal custody agreement. But for the first time, they had a path forward that didn't feel like choosing between terrible options. "What about the children?" Sarah asked. "How do we explain this to them?" "We tell them the truth," Emily said firmly, "in age-appropriate ways, with professional help. But no more secrets. Secrets are what got us here." They agreed to start family therapy sessions, not just individual counseling for Ella and Ethan, but group sessions to help them all learn to function as an unconventional extended family. It wouldn't be easy, but it felt right. The meeting ran long, the sun setting outside the community center windows as they hammered out details. By the time they finished, something had shifted between them. The anger wasn't gone, but it had made room for something else, a shared determination to make the best of an impossible situation. Walking to their cars, Sarah caught Emily's arm. "I know sorry isn't enough," she said, her voice trembling. "But we are so sorry." Emily looked at this woman she'd known for years, the neighbor who'd borrowed cups of sugar, who'd watched Ella when Emily had the flu, who was now bound to them by circumstances none of them could have imagined. "I know," she said softly. "We all have to find a way forward. For the kids. All three of them." That night, Emily and Michael sat on their back porch, looking at the stars. Next door, they could see David and Sarah doing the same thing on their porch. The space between their houses had felt like a war zone for months, but maybe now it could become a bridge. "Are we crazy?" Michael asked. "Trying to raise this baby together?" Emily thought about Ella, sleeping upstairs, her body changing with a life she couldn't understand. She thought about Ethan, confused and isolated, trying to grasp the consequences of actions he hadn't fully understood. And she thought about the baby, innocent of all this trauma, deserving of love despite the circumstances of its creation. "Maybe," she admitted, "but sometimes crazy is all we've got." From inside, they heard Ella calling for a glass of water. Regular life went on, even in the midst of extraordinary circumstances. Tomorrow, they would start telling both children about the plan, helping them understand their roles not as parent and father, but as sister and brother to the baby that would join their unconventional family. It wasn't perfect, but it was a way forward. A fragile piece built on shared pain and hope for healing. The contractions started during breakfast. Ella was picking at her cereal, complaining about the backache that had kept her up all night, when her face suddenly went white. Emily knew immediately. They'd been warned this might happen early, given Ella's age and size. "Michael," she called, already grabbing the pre-packed hospital bag. They'd rehearsed this moment dozens of times, but now that it was happening, everything felt surreal. Ella didn't understand why it hurt so much, crying and clutching her stomach as they helped her to the car. The drive to the hospital was tense, with Emily in the backseat holding Ella, while Michael broke every speed limit. The hospital staff were waiting for them. They'd been briefed about the situation months ago. Dr. Chin met them at the entrance, her calm presence an anchor in the chaos. They whisked Ella away to the pediatric wing, specially prepared for this unusual case. "I wanted to stop," Ella whimpered as they settled her into the hospital bed. "Make it stop, Mommy." Emily's heart shattered for the millionth time. How do you explain labor and delivery to a child who still believes in Santa Claus? The medical team had practiced using child-friendly language, but there was no way to make this less frightening for a 10-year-old. News traveled fast. Within an hour, Sarah and David arrived, hovering uncertainly in the waiting room. Despite their agreement to raise the baby together, these moments were still awkward, filled with unspoken guilt and anger that no amount of therapy had completely erased. "Ethan's asking about her," Sarah said quietly to Emily during a coffee run. "He doesn't understand why he can't be here." Emily nodded, understanding the complexity of their situation. Ethan, still in therapy, was struggling to grasp the full impact of what had happened. He was worried about his friend, but couldn't comprehend that he was about to become a father at 12. The hours dragged on. Ella's small body wasn't ready for this, making the labor difficult and dangerous. The medical team moved efficiently around her, monitoring every vital sign, while Emily and Michael took turns holding her hand and wiping her tears. Nobody noticed Ethan at first. He had apparently slipped away from his aunt's house and taken 3 buses to reach the hospital. They found him in the hallway outside Ella's room, looking small and scared in his oversized hoodie. "I heard her crying," he said when the adults discovered him. "I just wanted to make sure she was okay." Before anyone could decide what to do, Ella's voice called out from the room. "Ethan? Is that you?" The adults exchanged looks. Months of therapy and legal discussions hadn't prepared them for this moment. But something in Ella's voice, the fear and pain mixed with relief at hearing her friend, made the decision for them. "5 minutes," Michael said gruffly. "Supervise." Ethan approached Ella's bed cautiously, his face pale at seeing her hooked up to monitors and IVs. "Does it hurt bad?" Ella nodded, tears streaming down her face.
"I'm scared."
"Me too," he whispered, and for a moment, they were just 2 children caught in something much bigger than themselves. The moment was interrupted by another contraction. Dr. Chen appeared, checking monitors with growing concern. "Her blood pressure is dropping. We need to move to the or now." Everything accelerated after that. Ella was rushed into emergency surgery while Emily and Michael paced the waiting room. David had taken Ethan home, but Sarah stayed, all of them bound together by worry for the child who was about to deliver a child. The surgery lasted 3 hours. Every minute felt like a year. Emily found herself holding Sarah's hand at one point, neither of them commenting on this unexpected moment of connection. Finally, Dr. Chen emerged, looking tired but relieved. "They're both stable," she announced. It was touch and go for a while, but Ella pulled through. "And the baby, it's a boy. 6 pounds, 4 ounces. The relief in the room was palpable. Michael sank into a chair, his face in his hands. Sarah called David with the news. Emily just stood there, trying to process that she was now technically a grandmother at 38. They were allowed to see Ella first. She looked tiny in the recovery bed, pale but peaceful under the effects of the anesthesia. Then they were led to the nursery, where a small bundle wrapped in blue waited for them. "He needs a name," the nurse prompted gently. They gathered around the newborn, Emily, Michael, Sarah, and David, all looking down at this tiny person who had changed all their lives before he even existed. "Oliver," Emily said suddenly. "It means peace." The others nodded. Peace was what they all needed, what they'd been working toward these past months. Looking at Oliver's innocent face, they could almost believe it was possible. The next few weeks were a blur of adjustments. Ella recovered quickly, as children do, but seemed content to let the adults handle Oliver. She'd visit him in the nursery they'd set up in Emily and Michael's house, cooing at him like she would a new doll, then happily return to her own toys and games. Ethan was allowed supervised visits once a week, part of his therapy process. He was curious about Oliver, but, like Ella, showed no real understanding of being a parent. The therapist said this was healthy. Both children needed to maintain their childhood roles while the adults managed the responsibilities. Gradually, a new normal emerged. The 2 houses developed a rhythm, sharing baby duties like any extended family. Oliver spent 3 days with each set of grandparents, his schedule carefully maintained to provide stability. The garage that had once held Michael's workshop became a shared nursery, a neutral space between the 2 homes. The neighborhood gossip eventually died down. Other families grew used to seeing both sets of grandparents walking Oliver in a stroller, taking turns with midnight feedings and doctor appointments. If people thought it was strange, they kept it to themselves. Ella and Ethan slowly rebuilt their friendship, carefully supervised and supported by their therapists. They were different now, more subdued, carrying burdens no child should have to bear. But they were healing. They would always share a connection through Oliver, but they were encouraged to focus on their own lives, their own healing. One evening, as Emily rocked Oliver to sleep, she looked out the nursery window at the 2 houses, hers and Sarah's, connected by this unexpected bridge of circumstance. The pain wasn't gone, the anger not completely resolved, but something else had grown in their place, a determination to make something good out of something tragic. Oliver stirred in her arms, his tiny hand gripping her finger. In his face, she could see traces of both Ella and Ethan, but he was his own person, innocent of the circumstances of his birth. He represented both their greatest challenge and their greatest hope, a new beginning born from an impossible situation. As she placed him in his crib, Emily heard the sound of children laughing. Ella was in the backyard with some school friends, their voices carrying through the open window. Next door, Ethan was shooting baskets with his therapy group. Their lives were continuing, growing, healing. It wasn't the future any of them had imagined, but they were making it work, one day at a time, together.
Disclaimer: this channel does not support or tolerate any form of discrimination, racism, prejudice, or violation of human rights. The stories presented here are original and created by the author with the aim of promoting reflection, awareness, and dialogue. All content is developed with respect for diversity and the dignity of all people.